The events that took place on that horrific day cannot be changed, as much as I wish they could.
17-year-old Lewis pleading guilty to involuntary manslaughter and willful injury in the 2020 killing of 37-year-old Zachary Brooks.
If this story here doesn't break your heart, you might want to get checked out for heart failure, because this story absolutely broke me. Back in September, we learned the story of Pieper Lewis, an Iowa teen and sex trafficking victim who killed a 37-year-old Zachary Brooks, who she accused of rape. She was just 15 at the time. She originally faced up to 20 years in prison, but was given a deferred sentence of probation, 200 hours of community service, and was ordered to pay more than $4,000 in civil penalties. But what actually brought this case to the mainstream was that under Iowa law, the court additionally had to order Lewis to pay $150,000 in restitution fees to Brooks's family, the man she accused of assaulting her. And that had everyone calling out the judicial system in Iowa for forcing a sex trafficking victim, and a teenager at that, to pay her abuser's family any amount of money, let alone $150,000. And that is almost double what the average household income makes in a year. The way that the United States treats sex trafficking victims is absolutely appalling, especially when it comes to victims of color. But brace yourselves, because the story gets even more complicated from here. Because she recently made an escape from the probation center she was serving her brand new sentence in.
Not only did she escape and walk out of the front doors, she also cut off her GPS monitoring bracelet. So now that she's left, she's now facing the maximum sentence of 20 years once she's recaptured again. And it makes you wonder, she gets 5 years of supervised probation versus 20 years behind bars. What would be going on in her mind that would make her want to risk all of that and leave?
Advocates for victims of sexual violence across social media and organizations had already voiced their concern about her ability to even serve the new probation sentence because of the trauma she experienced. And I can't even imagine what she has gone through for her to think that the safest place for her to be was not inside that detention center. And although she is back in custody, she has a much more complex and scary road ahead of her now. Her case is unfortunately a very familiar one that we have seen year after year, but more specifically of teens of color who have been held legally responsible for killing their abusers and traffickers. Sarah Cruzan was 13 when she was trafficked and 16 when she killed her trafficker, sentenced to life in prison. She was pardoned this summer after serving 18 years in prison. Crystal Kaiser was 17 when she was charged for killing her 34-year-old trafficker and has been awaiting being sentenced for 2 years. And likely the most famous case of all, Cyntoia Brown was 16 when she killed her abuser and served 15 years in prison before she was given clemency. And all of these cases show how our legal system punishes the victim rather than protecting them. The most recent figures from the U.S. National Human Trafficking Hotline identified over 22,000 trafficking victims and survivors in 2020. Of those, 14,000 were cases of sex trafficking. Farm and domestic work are common avenues for labor trafficking, according to the hotline. And in the case of Pieper, Iowa Republican officials have been extremely quiet on her case, but Iowa's Democratic officials said that they are willing to make changes to the law when a new legislative session starts in January. But given the latest midterm results, with a Republican unseating the Democratic incumbent, it doesn't appear to be changing anytime soon, unless Iowa residents decide to make this a priority and push Republicans to make much-needed changes to protect teen victims in the future. You can find me on Instagram and TikTok. I'm Constanza Eliana for Rebel HQ.